Week 6 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire this week. The first quarterback, Sam Darnold of the Seattle Seahawks. So Darnold, we know last season he had a big year with Minnesota, and now he's already coming into his own over the last couple weeks with the Seattle Seahawks team, even though it's a bad loss versus Tampa Bay, and obviously a track meet in that ball game in week 5. So the last few weeks for Darnold, week 3 versus New Orleans, 218 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 4, Arizona, 242 pass yards, touchdown, 24 rush yards. And then week 5, the monster game versus the Bucs, 341 pass yards, 4 touchdowns and an interception. So week 6, a good matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars, a defense that can't stop anyone. Obviously, Darnold has one of the better receivers in the league in Jackson Smith and the Jigba, and he's out there in tons of fantasy leagues right now at 69%. So like I said, this offense is clicking. Darnold's getting more comfortable. He's making big plays and definitely a QB. Teared off the wire this week. Next quarterback, Jackson Dart of the New York Giants. He's been on the list a couple weeks in a row now, is Jackson Dart. Regular quarterback. Instead of fantasy football, the decisions weren't great and the turnovers were bad for Jackson Dart. But in terms of fantasy football so far, his first 2 starts, he's gone out there and he's averaged 20 fantasy points. Week 4 versus the Chargers, 111 pass yards, a touchdown, 54 rush yards, a rushing touchdown. And then week 5 at the Saints, 202 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 55 rush yards, and a fumble loss. So he's going to get your rushing upside, is Jackson Dart. I know he holds on to the football a little bit long than he should, and he looks to take off sometimes when he shouldn't have to, is Jackson Dart. But like I said, in terms of fantasy football, stats is what it's all about. And Jackson Dart, he's getting the rushing yards. He's going to throw the football a whole lot as well, where the Giants will most likely be trailing a majority of these games. I know week 6, it's a short week here. Tough matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the better defenses in the league. But Jackson Dart, like I said, he's going to work his way into some points, even with Malik Neighbors out. With the rushing upside, I think in deeper leagues, and especially 2 quarterback leagues, he's worth an ad. And he's available right now. He's Dart in 61% of fantasy leagues. Next quarterback, Tua of the Miami Dolphins. And no Tyreek Hill, and I thought Tua still went out there. He had a pretty good game at the Carolina Panthers. Him and Waddle connected on a touchdown. Darren Waller had a touchdown. Achane in the back of the end zone. So obviously those are going to be the main targets in this offense with Hill out for the season. In the last few games here for Tua, week 3 at Buffalo, 146 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an INT, 10 rush yards. Week 4 versus Jets, 177 pass yards, 2 touchdowns in that game. And then week 5 at Carolina, like I said, the big game, 256 pass yards, 3 touchdowns in that one. So week 6, not a great matchup versus the Chargers. I think their defense is still a decent unit versus quarterbacks. We saw Jaden Daniels. He didn't have a big ball game. It was more Krosky Merritt and the running game doing it for the Washington Commanders in last week's ball game. But Tua, like I said, even with Tyreek Hill out, they still got good playmakers in the offense's Miami Dolphin team, and their team that's going to be trailing early and often. Tua's out there in 70% of fantasy leagues and worth an ad this week. Next quarterback, Mac Jones of the San Francisco 49ers. Mac Jones, 3-0 is the start of the season, filling in for Purdy, who's been in and out of the lineup this season. And Mac Jones out there in 96% of fantasy leagues. And the games he started this season, week 2 with New Orleans, 279 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, 6 rush yards, a fumble loss. Week 3 versus Arizona, 284 passing yards, a touchdown, interception in that one. And then he started week 5 on Thursday night last week, 342 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. And that was with all backups pretty much. Obviously, George Kittle was still out. Ricky Pearson was out. Juwan Jennings was out. And he got the job done with Kendrick Bourne, Demarcus Robinson, and Jake Tongs was Mac Jones. So Mac Jones is a pretty good matchup at Tampa Bay, 9th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. He's got confidence in this Kyle Shanahan system, is Mac Jones. And he's playing for incentives as well, because if he wins one more game as a starter, he's going to get $400,000 as part of his contract. So with those factors, and he's got confidence in the Shanahan system, when Purdy out maybe a couple more weeks, Mac Jones a good ad this week. In the final quarterback, Dylan Gabriel of the Cleveland Browns. I thought overseas, tough environment, first start versus a good defense of the Minnesota Vikings. Dylan Gabriel went out there, kept his team in the game the whole game. It came down to the wire with Carson Wentz drive touchdown towards the end with about 20 seconds left. And Gabriel, 190 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 rush yards in that game. Gabriel out there, 96% of fantasy leagues. Like I said, he's got good accuracy on his football. I know the deep ball don't look great for Gabriel and a lot of short yards, out routes he was throwing and he's got some mobility as well, even though he couldn't get away from some pass rushers. But I think Gabriel in this offense could be decent for this Cleveland Brown team. Like I said, in his first career start, to go out there and get 20 fantasy points versus a good Minnesota Viking team, and overseas where they didn't get a lot of good practice time in as well, I think it's a good start for Dillon Gabriel. And also week 6, on paper, I know it doesn't look like a great matchup, but believe it or not, the Steelers do give up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But like I said, I think it's still going to be a tough matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if you're in deeper leagues, and like I said, even dynasty leagues, where Gabriel could be a future good quarterback in fantasy football, definitely an ad this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire. Week 6 of the fantasy football season.